This morning we'll look at Luke chapter 17. Personally, I went through a season of my life where I didn't want to give God lip service. For so long I was surrounded by at times people that it seemed like they would say one thing and then they would talk about how great God was and how they were a Christian and how God saved them. And then when you would hang out with the person outside of church, it was a totally another world. They were nothing like they were in church. And I remember my first exposure to hypocrisy when I was attending youth group. And it was some of the younger teens at the time. And we were just, at church, it seemed like they were really on fire for God and everything was going well. And then there was one time when the youth leader stepped out and there was all this negative talk about the church and about Christianity, about the Bible, and about the youth leader. And it broke me in a sense. It left an indelible mark upon my mind, and it's still etched there now to the fact that people can be like that. But yet, in a more subtle way, sometimes we can ourselves be that way, where we're praising God. And so I went through that season of where, I just don't want to give God lip service. But it almost turned into another pendulum swing where I went the other way, where I was afraid then to out loud thank God for things, because I'm like, I just don't want to give God lip service. I just want to make sure that my heart is completely pure and I'm not just doing it just to do the right things, not to just check off the box. But I went the complete other way, but I realized of how much in the Psalms particularly that there is this outward form of worship of thanking God, of praising Him and praising His name, and He delights in it. It's not arbitrary. It's not something that one day He likes it, one day He doesn't, that He rejoices in it. And even if there is faults within our own hearts that maybe we're not able to see, He knows that. He's greater. I love it in 1 John where it says that if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. If there's something in our hearts that's condemning us, and we're struggling, we're going through that, we're seeing holy, holy is the Lamb, and we're laying down our lives. And when we come to certain songs that talk about that, we lay down our lives fully, or we give it all. It's tempting, isn't it, at times to withhold those words from our mouth. Because we're like, am I really giving it all? Is there something that I'm really holding back? Well, God knows that He is greater than our hearts. That if our heart condemns us, Jesus is greater than our heart. And He's greater than that condemnation within our heart. In Luke chapter 17, we look at this form of thankfulness. We see the power of the Messiah and His healing, cleansing power. And He heals, and this isn't too well known of or at least spoken well of a form of healing, but I think it's pertinent for our season. In Luke 17, verse 11, on the way to Jerusalem, He was passing along between Samaria and Galilee, and as He entered a village, He was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, Jesus, Messiah, have mercy on us. When He saw them, He said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving Him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And He said to him, rise and go your way, your faith has made you well. Amen. Your faith has made you well. Leprosy was very ostracizing. It excluded you from the community of God's people. It's not as though it's a disease that you could kind of just hide and get by with it and then just get along in the synagogue and in the tabernacle and then later on in the temple, and you could just kind of move on by. Just life is very smooth. If you had this disease, you were excluded from the community. This is all you knew. And your only form of friendship, your only form of community was other lepers. And some people say, leprosy is the deterioration of the flesh. There's all different forms of leprosy. It comes in greater instances than others. But nevertheless, if you had leprosy, it was not a good thing. You could not associate with anybody else. You had very particular rules in how you were to behave and live your life. You could not offer cleansing sacrifices for this. Just like with other uncleanness. In the Old Testament, you could offer some sacrifices or give a certain amount of time in a period and then offer a sacrifice and then you could be cleansed. If you're a leper, you're never considered cleansed. There is no sacrifice that you could offer for this. Doesn't matter how many bulls you bring up. Doesn't matter how many turtle doves, how many birds that you bring, goats, whatever. Doesn't matter if the Day of Atonement comes. Yom Kippur will not help you. If you're a leper, this is all you know. And there is no sacrifice for this. Leviticus 13, 45 and 46 says a leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes, so you got some attire to go with, and let the hair of his head hang loose, which was a disgrace, especially for women. And he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. That's all you know. You dwell outside the camp. You have your own form of community. You have your own friendships. And other lepers is all you have. And if you were to approach a person that was not leprous, you were to shout out unclean. So you can't hide it. You can't just kind of cover it up and hope to get by in society. You have to let other people know. You have to shout out, unclean, unclean. I am not clean. Lepers had their own community precisely with each other. Leprosy was a horrible skin disease. Now this healing that Jesus comes upon, this healing that Jesus gives, is unique as opposed to most others. It has unique qualities to it. Predominantly the fact that they had to leave Jesus before they could even receive their healing. So they come out, they see Jesus, the only one who they know that there is hope that he's going to heal them, and they cry out, have mercy on us. He's your last hope. If you had one hope to be healed of this horrible disease, you better bet that you are going to shout as loud as possible, make sure that Messiah is going to hear you. You're going to make sure that Rabbi will come and heal you of your disease. Healing was not immediate. Jesus instructed them. So they came up to Jesus, and it mentions, Luke actually mentions they were at a distance, and so this whole interaction was kind of somewhat of a distance. And they said, you will heal us. Jesus tells them, actually, he says, go and show yourselves to the priests. Go to the priesthood. Offer an offering. Show them your healing. The unique part of this is they had to trust that they were going to be healed before the healing came. Amen. So they were told to go and show yourselves to the priest, which is a way of saying that you're going to be healed. There would be no point in going to the priesthood and showing yourself for healing if you wasn't going to receive it. And the priests had a lot of duties that time. I mean, they had a form of real estate in which they were to check houses to see if there was mold. They had a form of cleanliness. It wasn't just sacrifices. And of course, you had to know animal anatomy to really get that far, to know how to properly sacrifice an animal. It's not just as, oh, okay, we'll just put the animal and light them on fire. It's not that simple. There's instructions to it. There's a detail to it. There's care that's taken. And they were also to check infections and diseases, particularly like leprosy. And Jesus told them, go and show that you're going to be healed even before you're healed. Go. And so they leave and they go and they're healed along the way. The way that the text indicates, it doesn't say exactly when they were healed. I don't think they got to the priest yet. I think it was on their way there they were healed, and that was it for them. But they did not have that healing right then and there. See, their response took a whole nother level of faith. Their response took the fact of Jesus said, go and show yourself to the priest. They may be thinking to themselves, okay, we'll go show ourselves to the priest. There may be a level of doubt of wondering, okay, so when we leave you, are we going to be able to find you in case this doesn't work out? If we leave you, can we locate you again so that way you can do this another way? Because maybe we're going to the priest and we say, hey, priest, I'm healed, and you're still leprous. That's pretty embarrassing. Jesus told us we would be healed. He was telling them, go to the priesthood to display your healing. And they trusted They believed that Jesus would heal them along the way. Now, for this instance, he did not lay his hands upon them. There's another leper that's mentioned in Luke chapter 5, verses 12 through 14. He's healed leprosy before, but this one's a little bit different. It says, while in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. And he charged them to tell no one, but go himself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing as Moses commanded for a proof to them. But now, even more, the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. For them, he laid his hands directly on him, and he was healed. There wasn't a bother of leprosy then, because properly you couldn't touch a leprous person. But he laid his hands right on him. Probably the disciples were a little freaked out, wondering, Jesus, what are you doing? And he heals this man. And he tells him to go and show himself to the priest. And think for a moment of how radical your life has changed. Because you have never known anything outside of the community up until the point at which you received leprosy. Most of these people have probably had it for quite a while. And now they can go out into the community again. You can have life again. What is it like to be so long without knowing other people other than your own community? A lot of them did live completely in isolation alone. But what is it like now that you can be restored back into fellowship with people? You can get back into the community again. You can go to the supermarket. Life has radically changed. In the Gospels, Jesus never encounters someone that does not have their life radically transformed. You know the only people that he does that to? It's the religious hypocrites. Those are the only people that encounter Christ and have no transformation whatsoever. In fact, their hearts are very hardened toward him. If anything, they despise him. Now, the only similarity is the fact that Jesus told the man to show himself to the priest between these two events. For them, they had to trust the word of Christ, that to leave his presence and to go to the priest was enough. His word was enough to heal them of their ailments. So if a person told you to go and withdraw $1 million from your bank account, would you immediately go to the bank account and trust that $1 million is going to be there? You may think, well, there's not much risk involved as far as telling the teller that, hey, I would like to withdraw $1 million today. Well, there's a little bit of a risk if it doesn't come forward. Very embarrassed. You go up to the teller, slap down, you remember card, all right, I would like to withdraw $1 million, please. And then you look and there's $1,273. It's a little bit of a discrepancy. You're like, okay, what's that like? And it's extremely embarrassing. For them, it would have been extremely embarrassing to go to the priest. You don't want to be embarrassed by the teller telling you, I'm sorry, you don't have nearly that much in your account. I don't know what you're coming up to. But they went, they had faith, they trusted Jesus, and as they left, they were healed. Now, this is where the event takes a different turn, because only one comes back to thank him. Only one comes back and rejoicing and praising God. And of all people, it's the Samaritan. Of all people, it's the person that is rejected most. So not only do you have your own leprous community that is outcast, but a Samaritan is a whole other level. Because in the distinction between Jew and Gentile, Gentiles don't necessarily care for Jews, and Jews don't necessarily care for Gentiles. But in the middle, as a Samaritan, you're not really liked by both parties. A Samaritan is a hybrid, and they have this their own community, their own form of worship, their own temple, their own ways of worship. And they're considered to be outcast by both parties. Gentiles don't really like you, and Jews don't really care for you. You have a bad history with the Jews. That's why in John chapter 4, whenever Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well, and John inputs this comment, and he says, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. That's a little bit of, in the English when we translate that, that's a little bit of a more polished version than in the original Greek. But they want nothing to do with Samaritans. They despise them. Samaritans don't really care for them so much either. So as a Samaritan, you would have been cast out of your society. And this is all that you have. So you go from the level of, hey, Jews and Gentiles don't like me. As Samaritans, we have our own group. And now the Samaritans don't even so much care for me. So they've cast me out of the group. And the other Jews, which is indicating that the fact that Jesus says that only one comes to me, is a foreigner. So that indicates he's probably the only Samaritan there. This is not a group of leper Samaritans. Only one. And the Jewish lepers probably bring him into their community. Hey, bud, we'll go ahead and join you. We're already unclean, so it's all right. We'll just be a part of our group. So they adopt him into their group. They go on their way. They're healed. The most startling thing is 9 don't come back to him. You know? I mean, you have just had your life radically transformed by Jesus Christ. And 9 of them decide, you know what? I could walk back and thank Jesus and praise God. I think I'm fine right here. I'm just going to keep going to the priest. I'm just going to do my thing. You know, my healing isn't even contingent upon my returning to Jesus Christ. That's the key. You know, they were still healed. It was not as though Jesus took that healing back. Said, hey, if you're not going to thank me for it, I'll make you a leper again. See how you like that? He doesn't take it back. They're still healed. So their healing wasn't contingent upon coming back to Jesus Christ. But the Samaritan is so filled with thankfulness that he can't but help go back to Jesus and to thank him for it. It wasn't as though Jesus said, hey, you go on your way, and when you're healed, you come back and thank me. You locate me, you find me, put me in your GPS, whatever you have to do, and you thank me for it. And then you can keep your healing. It doesn't say that. All 10 are healed. 9 of them feel as though it's not important to thank him for it. 1 does. And of all people, the person that's considered the outcast of the outcast, the Samaritan, the worst of the worst. You know, Jews would have all kinds of sayings and idioms of which to say that it's not bad enough that you're a Gentile, but that you're a Samaritan. But it was the Samaritan was the one who came back and thanked Jesus Christ. It says that he came back praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. And then Luke adds, now he was a Samaritan. Their suffering had radically transformed their life, and now thankfulness had radically transformed the Samaritan's life. How often do we feel as though in our own situation that we are so filled with thankfulness that there is nothing but natural overflow of that thankfulness? That Jesus, you have radically saved me. Do we realize that we have been raised from the dead spiritually? Amen. That we were once dead in our trespasses and sins, and Christ raised us from the dead. That is no small miracle. Jesus has given us new life. Jesus has given us an inheritance. We are called sons and daughters of the King. We have a great inheritance. You know, we may think that the great inheritance is the golden streets or whatever, all the amenities to heaven. But man, the greatest inheritance that we get to enjoy is to be in the presence of the Lamb throughout all of eternity and to declare, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. If you don't like repetition, you may not like heaven. If you don't like the repetition of declaring thankfulness unto God, heaven may not be heaven for you. How many times before the living creatures, the elders, that they declare the same thing over and over again? Worthy is the Lamb. Honor, blessing, power, glory. And if you don't necessarily care for thanking Jesus, heaven may not be the place for us. Heaven is filled with praising Jesus throughout all of eternity. What more could we ever want? The Samaritan comes back and can't but help thank Jesus for what he has experienced. And as Christians, we all should be the most thankful people on the planet because we have so much to be thankful. Even if on our current situation that we are in, the ground feels as though it is collapsing around us, our world is on fire, but Jesus is still our Savior. Jesus has still redeemed us. Now, before I get really into driving that point I want to take another emphasis to realize that don't discredit someone that you may have considered that should not be qualified for the call of God. The Samaritan was the least unlikely person to be considered qualified to be praising God. And there's a sense in which he's declaring the thankfulness to God and the gospel, the power of Jesus Christ. A Samaritan is no way qualified for that according to their standards. A Samaritan? I mean, this Samaritan woman in John chapter 4, I know this isn't about her, but when Jesus declares to her the glory of God, and then she goes and she tells her village, and all her village comes out, man, that's greater than any Pharisee, anything any Pharisee has ever done. Or at least in their time, for the Pharisees that was rejecting Christ. Jesus called rejected people of the world. Jesus called tax collectors. He called fishermen. He called the zealots to all get along, to have community together, to be his disciples, to carry his word unto the nations. Paul was a Pharisee. And get this is a proof of God's sense of humor. God called Paul, a Pharisee, to have a ministry among the Gentiles. A ministry among the non-Jews. A Pharisee, your Jewishness was your pride. The temple, the Torah, this was everything to you. And yet he places in Paul, Paul definitely had a great ministry among the Jews, but the Jews rejected a lot of the stuff that he said. And they said, fine, then I'll take it unto the Gentiles. And then he said that I magnify my ministry to the Gentiles. God may call you to people that you would least likely ever expect to be called to. Maybe at times if we're dealing with bitterness in our hearts, there's a sense, you can call it the humor of God, call it the ironic nature of the call of God. God very well may call you to that group of people. And don't ever discredit yourself. And most of all, please don't discredit other people because they seem like the least likely to be a part. You know, the most people that I consider the most effective, and this can be in all different kinds of spectrums of ministry or of telling people about Jesus, the people that I would least likely, off the top of my mind, consider to be the most effective, God usually has a powerful effect upon calling people that are the most effective that I would least likely ever expect. I would never expect this person to be the most qualified for that area, but we're not. And then he builds us up and then he qualifies us for it. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says, for consider your calling, brothers, not many of you were wise according to worldly standards, not many were powerful, not many were of noble birth. They're really building them up here. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. If you're weak here this morning, God has called you to be strong in his strength. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. I have a pet peeve whenever I do Christian funerals. Whenever we have a moment of an open forum and we have people, if you want to have a moment of just getting up and talking about the individual, and I have a pet peeve of when people get up and they start telling bad stories about the person. Oh, I remember when he was an old scoundrel, and they would go on to the story, and they would mention very little bit about their Christian witness, and it's all this bad negative stuff. And they think it's kind of I don't know whether it's breaking the ice or whatever, and then they sit down, and it's just kind of like, I'm not sure if that person wanted to be remembered by all their past mistakes. Right. Maybe they want to make them more human and less saintly in some way. I don't know. But I don't think they would want to be remembered most of all. They want to be most remembered as the fact that Jesus has redeemed them. Jesus has called them to something great. And Jesus has called you to something great here this morning. To carry out his word, to boldly proclaim the gospel, to live out the life. We see this grateful spirit that should abide in all Christians. So the Samaritan isn't an anomaly. That should be something within all of us. That we are the most thankful people around. And it has the power to build, to destroy criticism, and to destroy. It's easy to get in a group. It's all about negative talk and about how terrible their lives are and about all this and this. And it can be easy. It's much easier to be sucked into that and to get along with that than it is to try and reverse that, isn't it? But we're called to be people that reverse that. We're not called to just be a thermometer, to just detect what the area is like. We're called to be a thermostat, to change it up, to change the atmosphere, to be different. Luke chapter 8, Jesus heals a demon-possessed man. The man is excited. He wants to join Jesus. He says, please, Messiah, let me go with you on your journeys. And Jesus actually rejects that. He says, no. Luke 8:39, he says, return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. Jesus actually rejects his form of discipleship in that way. And he's like, no, you do your thing here. And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. And the Samaritan came back thanking God, even before he got to the priest. Jesus has graciously saved us. And I wrote down this comment that I found by a man by the name of Leon Morris. And he said this about this text, and it blew me away. And if this is the only part that you remember, it's not in my own words, of course the scriptures, and then remember this section. It says, if people do not give thanks quickly, they usually do not do it at all. If we do not have an instantaneous form of thanksgiving, we probably won't go back later and do it again. It's about building that habit. It's about making that a thing of us. Last verse, and we'll close. Psalm 139, verse 1 through 3. It's a Thanksgiving song to consider God's praise. I give you thanks, O Lord, with my whole heart. Before the gods, I sing your praise. I bow down toward your holy temple and give thanks to your name for your steadfast love and your faithfulness. For you have exalted above all things your name and your word. On the day I called, you answered me. My strength of soul you increased.